with members of the VMware security team who are out there, day to day, ensuring that their employees and assets that are safe. Phil is leading product marketing for Ambient AI, and he's been working with both Prasad and Phil at VMware for some time. So he's going to lead the next session. Phil, I'll hand off to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Yes, that was a great interaction with Shakar and Martine. And yes, indeed, there's a lot going on in the world today, both within our borders and outside of our borders. Let's jump in. Really excited about hosting this panel. Couldn't be more timely. The topic, transforming a global security organization with AI. And Stephanie, as you mentioned, we have two very highly respected security and tech executives from a company that is now a great customer of Ambient AI's, and that is VMware. So we have a lot to talk about with them. Let's get started with our introductions. First, I want to check in with the head of physical security and resiliency at VMware, Prasad Saranjame. Prasad, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Great to be with all of you guys.
It's great to have you. And then also let me introduce the Senior Manager of Physical Security Systems and Technology at VMware, Philp Jang. Phil.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Absolutely. And I'm Philip. So we've got Philip, Phil, and Prasad, the three Ps. Let's get started. We've got a lot to talk about. First, Prasad, I know you and your team have talked and written quite a bit about Physical Security 2.0. Can you tell us what exactly is Physical Security 2.0?
Yeah, absolutely, Philip. Look, I mean, we developed a vision for how we could transform physical security here at VMware to, quite honestly, meet the needs of a growing business. VMware is a fast-growing company, as most of us know. The risk landscape is changing, expanding always, so we have to address that. And then we all have to do all of this by scaling efficiently and not always rely or only rely on labor like the industry has done historically. So it's a real challenge. So to address this, we developed this vision that we call Physical Security 2.0 to really transform from a traditional security operation, which we have had, to a modern, colleague-friendly, and technology-enabled security experience, right? So we like to use the analogy of going from TSA-like security, for those of us that fly in the US, you know what that looks like, to more like a Disneyland experience, right? Where once you enter the Disneyland gates, you feel safe for the most part, but you don't really see security. You intrinsically kind of just feel safe, and all you see is smiling faces. You don't see security guards for the most part unless there's an incident. So that's kind of the vision. It's our true North Star. And that's what we call Physical Security 2.0.
That's great. And Phil, on that note about having Disneyland-like security, I know that Physical Security 2.0, all that work requires a lot of investments in innovative technologies. And I know you and VMware are working closely with us at Ambient AI. Can you discuss the process and the steps you took to making that decision to work with Ambient?
Sure. Yeah, we started looking at several different innovative technologies that were available in physical security today. And we started doing some proof of concepts around the use of robots, drones, and artificial intelligence and things like that, and computer vision intelligence. Out of all of those proof of concepts and everything, we saw some immediate outcomes and some good things from the computer vision intelligence side. And so some of those things were like, with Ambient AI, we did a proof of concept and found that, we had about 2,000 people that were tailgating in or entering our facility without using their authentication card or badge. And we did not know that it was going to be that much, so much higher than what we expected. We were able to use the software and dispatch directly with a rapid response team to then help change that culture. We got support from leadership, of course, and our CSO to actually introduce a new zero tolerance policy as well, which over time dropped our infractions for that building in that proof of concept from that 2,000 number down to 10 per week. So very, very big impacts there. The other thing that we also noticed was there was a huge amount of physical access control systems alarms that come in. if you read some of my articles, I talk about being a Paxaholic. For over 20 years, I've been chasing down false alarms from our physical access control systems. And we noticed that 99% of the alarms that were coming in seemed to be false positives. And Ambient was able to help us identify and reduce 83% of those alarms, which we've been tracking since about April of 2020.
Well, first of all, that's great. And congrats to you and your team on the success in lowering those false alarms. And yes, I know you've written and talked a lot about trying to iterate from being a Paxaholic. Maybe we can just take a step back. As companies enhance their security, one of their big concerns is related to personal privacy and the use of PII. Prasad, maybe before we dive into some of the examples Phil touched on, can you talk about how your decisions tied in with considerations for personal privacy, PII? How did that factor into your decision on going with a computer vision and AI platform?
Yeah, very important topic, obviously, right? Look, I mean, privacy is almost as important as security in this day and age, as we all know. And the challenges that we have in physical, one of the challenges is, most of our technologies seem to be a choice between security and privacy. And it doesn't have to be that way, right? Here at VMware, we have kind of a, mission of privacy by design in everything that we do. So when we started looking at, different technologies, different solutions, like Phil was talking about, facial recognition is kind of the best example of that, privacy, just not, great solution from a privacy standpoint. So one of the things we loved about Ambient was they had made a commitment to not do facial recognition and then strip any PII information from all data that they store and process. So that was like a big win for us. Having said that, we engaged our internal privacy team from the get-go to make sure that they were totally comfortable with this approach. And it's great that we have their full support, and we can stand tall and say, yeah, this is a secure solution, but does not infringe on anybody's privacy, which is so huge in this day and age.
It really is huge. And I liked your point about privacy being just as an important point of emphasis as security. It really is. Let me transition now and go back to Phil. Phil, you touched on some use cases. Maybe you can drill down a little bit more. You talked about tailgating and other examples. Can you walk through what some of the other core use cases are for the computer vision intelligence platform you've deployed? Maybe give us some examples and data and metrics related to that.
Sure, yeah. So I mentioned tailgating and unauthorized access. So we basically don't want people just going into the offices without being authorized to be there, right? You wouldn't want someone sitting behind your laptop having unauthorized access to all the information that's coming through that, right? So it's the same thing with physical security. And so that's one of the main things that we were able to identify and help change the culture on here. The other thing was the PAX systems alarms, or physical access control systems. We generally get about 1 million of those alerts per year. So each one of those alarms have to be responded to and investigated to make sure that there wasn't a breach, right? So in those actions, it requires a physical person to actually chase these alarms down. And so that translates to labor, and that translates to additional labor if you want to be chasing all these alarms. Ambient reducing our alarms, we've been tracking that for a couple of years now, and that is now down to 83% of false positives that have been identified and handled by Ambient AI. The other thing that we all know in physical security, it's our dirty little secret. We have all these cameras, but there's not a possibility for all of our security officers to watch these cameras all the time. So we constantly have these cameras recording, and they are always an after the fact type of response. And so with Ambient AI, we're really able to orchestrate everything from the alert to the dispatch to the resolution all through the system, and that improves the response to make it rapid.
That's a great point about the shifting security at VMware from reactive to being proactive. And just as a follow-up, Phil, by cutting the false alarms over 80%, that must have represented such a significant shift for your security team. Just can you comment on how they reacted once these transitions were implemented? What were their response, and what did they do with some of the extra time and resources that they had to focus on other alarms?
Yeah, so there's several other initiatives that required their attention. So they've been able to focus on other things at the same time. But yeah, it's a significant amount of alarms that can be reduced by the system and allow your team to not be just chasing false positives all day.
Yeah, not chasing false positives. That's a plus. Congrats again. And let me tie this back, Prasad, to let's talk a little bit more about tailgating in particular. It's a problem a lot of organizations, especially with a lot of facilities that have an international presence, are dealing with. And I know you and Phil commented on a cultural shift that happened with this zero trust policy. Can you maybe talk to us a little bit more about your implementation of that zero tolerance policy for, zero tolerance policy for tailgating, maybe how that affected your organization and what the results were?
Yeah, look, I mean, we've already spoken a little bit about tailgating, so I won't repeat, what we have said, but let's focus on sort of the business impact, right? So, step back maybe now 2 years into the pandemic. We obviously, with tailgating, so tailgating is unauthorized access, somebody getting into the office without badging in, right? So we know that's a security problem. We always have known that. During the pandemic, what became clear is that was also a safety problem, because with contact tracing, how do you contact trace? How do you alert people that there is a COVID infection if you don't know who came into the office, right? So that was kind of, we were seeing those warning signs, and we said, you know what, never waste a crisis. So this is the perfect time for us to double down on our focus on tailgating and start this culture change. It's a long process, obviously, right? The biggest impact that AI has had on our tailgating mitigation efforts has been improving significantly our ability to accurately track and measure tailgating. As Phil said earlier, right, orders of magnitude more tailgating that we realized is happening with AI than we thought was happening before we had this capability to kind of accurately measure tailgating. So we at least understood more accurately the scale of the problem. And then that allowed us to kind of direct our mitigation efforts more directly and more promptly in real time, instead of like going after the fact, as Phil said, a week later and saying, hey, you badged in, you didn't badge in, have that sort of more close to when it actually happened. So there is more impact to having that conversation. So, more signage as a result, more training, as well as direct conversations with our colleagues to, again, educate them, right? This is a change in behavior, because historically, tech companies, right? I've been in different industries. I used to spend 3 years working in aerospace. I was used to walking through a turnstile every day when I got to the office. But that doesn't work in a culture like VMware, in most of Silicon Valley, right? We have this beautiful 100-acre campus. Can you imagine having turnstiles? So it doesn't work. So we have to balance sort of the culture and what our colleagues expect with making sure that we are all safe and secure. So, we talk about a zero tolerance approach to tailgating, but look, I mean, just knowing that majority of this tailgating is unintentional. Nobody comes in with intentions of like sneaking in and doing something bad, right? It's just habit. People are used to somebody holding the door open and a bunch of people walk in after they come back from lunch, which we totally understand. So while we say zero tolerance approach, and that is kind of the bar that we will stick to, our goal really is to make kind of the transformation where tailgating is not acceptable as a behavior, right? It's more of an exception, and it's kind of frowned upon a little bit, much like, if you're rude to your colleague, it's frowned upon. So same thing. So we don't want to like beat people over the head too strongly, but just kind of change that culture so it becomes unacceptable behavior going forward.
And I think that last word you just said, behavior, and the cultural change that you saw, I think that was clearly a very desired outcome, not just improving the stats, but also seeing that cultural and behavioral shift. Is that correct, Prasad?
Exactly. You got it.
That's good. Thank you. And then Phil, let's shift gears. So we talked about that example. You highlighted the decrease in false alarms significantly by over 80%. How has the implementation of this computer vision intelligence solution affected the speed of your security response to valid and legitimate incidents that occur?
Yeah, well, imagine you've got a list of things to do and everything has high priority, right, and attention that's required. If everything's high priority, then nothing is, and usually you lose things in the noise, or the true signal in the noise. So reducing the false positives and the total alarms where we've deployed the AI solution by 83% is a significant change in not only the operators being able to identify, yes, that's a real alert, and to automate and put through the workflow through ambient AI to dispatch and have that officer arrive there, but also increases the effectiveness of the security officers, knowing that they're going to be arriving to a real alarm or a real alert or something that we really do care about, something that's changing the culture, and also something that might be a real incident for us, right, to deal with. So definitely a lot of positive things there.
Yeah, and we can drill down a little bit more on the speed of the response and how that's affected the security organization. What I'm going to do is, maybe.
Yeah, why don't I expand a little bit on that
That
too?
would be great.
So the ambient AI solution allows us to track everything from the dispatch, from the alert coming into the dispatch to even when the officer arrives and the notes that they put in there. So you have a whole understanding of the timeline and where, like the mean time to respond to the alarm, the time that it took the security officer to get there, and then the time that it took them to resolve that alert. So all that's orchestrated in there, and actually in some of the dashboards. If you get a demo with ambient AI, I mean, it's great to look at the security operations dashboards and see how that breaks out, so that you can hold accountable the different mean times to respond and reduce those times. So over time, obviously, we started off at a certain amount for our mean time to respond, and then we've reduced that significantly since implementation.
That's great. Again, kudos to you and the team for that. Let me ask you a follow-up. It sounds like these examples, Phil, have really helped VMware realize just how broad-based a computer vision intelligence and AI-powered solution can be. Can you maybe highlight how that's affected your view of the entire security organization and physical security 2.0? Maybe Phil, you can comment first, and Prasad, you can jump in after that.
Yeah, so before, I mean, going through the proof of concepts and everything, and seeing the landscape for physical security technology, computer vision intelligence has really stood out as one of the game-changing, or maybe the game-changing technology that's out there. And we see that, like, a lot of companies are now clamoring to do exactly what ambient AI is doing, and trying even to use the same messaging, right? And marketing because we've all identified that this is a problem, and this is actually solving for that problem. So yeah, computer vision intelligence really stands out as the solution that helps us contextualize everything, again, bringing us to the same level playing field as cybersecurity, right, where they're able to track everything and digitize all their information. Now we're able to do that with computer vision intelligence, and we're able to even, throw different ideas or threat signatures out there, right? We might have had a wild animal on site, and so we say, hey, ambient, can you tell us that, when we see a wild animal out there, can you alert us and let us know? So these things, we might have security use cases that we haven't thrown at the computer vision intelligence yet, that we're going to be coming out with, and maybe even situations that we haven't thought through, where computer vision intelligence is going to be able to address those things.
That's great. And Prasad, clearly VMware is a leader in security, not just physical, but also in the cybersecurity space. Can you maybe highlight how this shift has really affected the overall security approach that you and your team are taking?
Yeah, before I do that, let me just quickly expand on Phil's point about, whether it's computer vision or there's a lot of other technologies that we are looking at as well. But
Yep.
even like AI, computer vision, we see this as a platform and just a plug for my colleagues in IT and workplace, for example, right? So there's use cases that we can see even beyond security. So once you have that capability, why won't you be able to like look at, conference rooms and meetings and things like that and just improve that overall experience, not from a security standpoint, but also from an IT standpoint, from a workplace. You start looking at like building leaks and things like that. So there's a lot more that we can do even outside of security, which is super exciting. So we kind of see all of these technologies as platforms that we can leverage, expand upon. Right, back to your question. I mean, so this is the beginning, right? I mean, this, as we said, is a transformation, and transformations take time. So as I said in the beginning, we started down this path with a very clear business objective. We wanted to transform our capabilities, improve our capabilities. We wanted to be able to scale more efficiently without adding a lot of cost and always relying on labor like we have done historically. And the reason we did that is, A, there is a business need, but we fundamentally believe that the physical security industry is, kind of ripe for disruption. This is the time, right? There's rapid advances in computer vision, AI, but also a lot of other IoT edge technologies. And we want to be industry leaders in that space, right? And ultimately, this is what VMware does. I mean, VMware is the leader in digital transformation, whether it's internally or helping our customers go through their own digital transformations. So the vision, the mission that we have sort of set up in the physical security team aligns very nicely with VMware's overall mission. So exciting times ahead.
Yes, definitely exciting times ahead. And it's great to hear how this aligns with the overall vision, even beyond security. Phil, what I'm going to do, we've got literally 8 minutes left. So we're going to take a question that we got through the chat. And then I've got one final question, then we'll wrap it up. Again, thank you both. The question we got for Phil, can VMware explain how they used ambient AI to actually measure and identify tailgaters to understand just how big the scope of the problem was and to understand precisely what was happening? That would be very helpful.
Sure, yeah. We actually use the integration that Ambient has with our Secure system and our access control system so that we could identify how many people have actually badged in and gotten authorized access versus people who didn't badge in. And it's a simple count between how many people came in versus how many people actually badged in. Those numbers then become our tailgating numbers, right? How many tailgates we have, and then on the side of how do we then reduce those numbers? That's when we do a rapid response and dispatch, and we have a physical security person interact with that person from the dispatch from Ambient.
Sure, and I know your comments earlier and Prasad's comments about having a Disneyland, a friendly approach as opposed to a TSA approach, I think have probably shaped the security response there, I imagine.
Yeah, definitely a customer experience driven type response.
Right.
We're assuming people want to do the right thing, but we're also planning for the worst. So that's kind of how we do things.
Absolutely. And Prasad, one more question in from the chat. Someone asked a very broad security question about how technologies and computer vision, intelligence, and AI are transforming physical security. But the comment was that it seems like the physical security industry as a whole can be slow to respond. How far do you believe we've come, and how far does the physical security have left to go to really fully transform in the way that VMware is?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, right? I mean, we have to start with a lot of empathy. There is a reason why the industry has been sort of conservative, risk averse and slow to change, right? We carry a lot of significant risk. The impact of that risk could be pretty significant if it happens, right? We all know that. So that is why traditionally the industry has been risk averse somewhat, not quite as fast paced or agile as the IT world has been. But that quite honestly is the challenge. And that is the opportunity for people like Phil and I to sort of bring the physical and digital worlds together, but do it in a controlled manner, right? So it's easy. The technology is always the easier part. Bringing people along on that journey of change is the harder part. As we all know, we are all human beings. Nobody's perfect. So we have our own sort of biases and ways of doing things. So it is really, really important to help our own teams understand why this is so important, right? The challenge in front of us is always going to keep increasing because we are in a growing business. The risk landscape keeps growing, as I've said earlier. So how are we going to actually scale, and how are we going to meet those needs? The way for us to do that is, a balance between obviously having a strong guard force, security officers on the ground. That doesn't go away. But then increasingly, just like the rest of the business world has gone through kind of the transformation to rely more and more on automation, more on technology. So you kind of bring that as a complement to what our staff does. So it's a change. It's not easy, but that's the challenge and that's the opportunity. And we know it's early days still, but we'll get there.
Yes, it's early days. We are hopefully getting there. We're optimistic as well. I really liked your point and your emphasis on empathy in adopting security practices. That's important. We've got 4 minutes left, so enough time for a quick question for each of you. Phil, someone asked a very practical question, which is, as you are a member of a large organization working to try to develop budgets and get budget approvals, what sort of business value assessments have you done, did you do, are you doing to help analyze and assess the impact of the investments in computer vision, intelligence, and AI solutions? What did you do previously, and what are you doing, and what do you recommend others do in order to make those cases?
Well, that's a loaded question there. So yeah, we did some business value assessments with Ambient directly. Ambient really helped us with identifying different areas that we might find return on investment, things like that, and was very surprised and happy with the results there. And it wasn't just a one-time thing, right? It was a constant reevaluation of the business case. As anyone who's had to do a business case knows, you always go back to the drawing board and say, where else can we find return on investment? Where else can we reduce? Where else is this going to help us out in the future? So I would suggest highly to put the onus on Ambient AI to come with a business value assessment for you, as well as, they're going to have to ask you a lot of questions and stuff, and understand your operations and where the value can be really attained. The other thing is, just look at things realistically and say, what things will this new paradigm of computer vision intelligence age, what will that change for us moving forward? And can that change happen? And can you get agreement from the people who run the other budgets for labor to agree to that, right? But a lot of that really came from the direction from Prasad. So really, Prasad would be great at answering this question.
That's perfect, Prasad. We have about 80 seconds left. So in these final minute or so, can you comment on that? And then just a brief comment on what's next with Physical Security 2.0 at VMware. And if you can do it all in 60 seconds, that would be great.
No, I think Phil covered the ROI piece, business value piece pretty well. So we don't need to talk any further about that. Happy to answer questions later on. I do have a hard stop at 11. But no, I guess in terms of what's next, right? So as I said, early days. So even with computer vision, we have now deployed this fully in our Palo Alto campus headquarters, right? Which is a great first step. But we have, Phil, 90 other buildings, 90 other office locations around the world. So there's a lot of opportunity. It's obviously takes a lot of justification, a lot of business case presentation to get the funds to get this going. But this is clearly the path that we have sort of decided to go down on. So it's just sort of learning from this experience, showing the value, showing the risk that we are able to mitigate with technology solutions like this, and then keep expanding that. So again, this is a multi-year journey. There's a lot of, more sort of ambient work that we have to do, but we're also looking at robots, we are looking at drones, and all of these other cool technologies. So the future is exciting and bright.
It is, and yes, it's a multi-year journey. First of all, thank you very much, Prasad. Thank you very much, Phil. We appreciate your insights. I wanted to also thank your teams who worked with you. With that, I want to transition back to Stephanie and back to our show. Thanks. Thanks so much, Phil and Prasad.
Thank you.
Thank you.